Good morning, everyone, from Mystery Island, Maryland. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel, McDuff Lives. McDuff Lives 1, McDuff Lives 3, both broadcasting this morning here on YouTube. And we archive all our shows at BitChute. If you're looking for something that YouTube has taken down, try my BitChute channel at McDuff Uncensored is the name of that channel. And thank you for joining me this morning. Hey, Mark is here. Oh, that was great fun last night. We dig deep within an hour, and I really enjoy the ability to pick at good brains like Mark Kulak. Thank you, Mark. And Paulie, hello. Robert, Swan, and carrying my favorite frequency with you as always. Thank you, Swan. Corky and Debbie and everyone else, good morning. Well, let's see, we have 10 people here, according to the little counter up there on the upper left. And I think this is one of my favorite shows, really. I mean, I think you're going to have, hold on to your seats, because this is some remarkable things that are not only important to the McDuff story, but important to us today, as we're still under the power of that Dulles Brothers cabal. And, you know, all of their tentacles that are still holding us down, like poor Gulliver held down by the Lilliputians. There's so many strings wrapped around our limbs that we can't exercise the liberty that our Constitution gives us and our predecessors fought for. Hot and sunny Texas, yeah. Okay, well, let's see. How does Woody Guthrie put it? Yeah, if you ain't got the do-re-mi, you better get back to beautiful Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Georgia, Tennessee. Yeah. California is the Garden of Eden, a paradise to live and to see. But believe it or not, you won't find it so hot if you ain't got the do-re-mi. Isn't it true? You know, I haven't been out there in 20 years. Peter Duke is there all the time in Love and Life, I think, while he sees all of the uh, deep state underground bunkers going in with the earth moving equipment around him. Life is very interesting, and we can just be observers and be entertained, right? The boot of the Knights Templar, interesting. And Lilliput. Yeah, that's right, Corky. I have had the same, you know, once I started realizing that the American people are prostrate, they are prone, lying on the ground, and our arms and legs are being restrained by this and that little emperor of or this or that stovepipe of the deep states connected one world order. And people seem to be able to survive in it. It's that boiling frogs problem, isn't it? You know, you're comfortable. It's very nice. You know, they give you lots of nice television programming, and the water feels comfortable. And you know, it starts getting hot, right, Texas? And you start thinking, well, it's okay. Winter's coming. I'll be fine. I'll just stay here. And then, but unfortunately, it just gets hotter and hotter. And then one day, all the cows are dead. And you say, "Oh my God, how am I going to make a living without cows? I'm in the ranch business, and they're all dead." Oh, it's too hot. Oh, is that all it is, or did they beam something down from one of those kooky satellites? How do we know? We can't know anything because everything is stovepiped. Everything is accorded to a certain path that runs eventually up to the big brain behind the curtain. And as long as the people that are subjecting ourselves to this will continue subjecting ourselves, it's going to just get tighter and tighter. You know, look what's happened to our money in the past 2 years. They did that to us without our objecting. We didn't object at all, did we? because we thought, oh, it's a national emergency. It's a national emergency. And so we have to destroy the financial backing behind all the businesses, homes, and retirement plans in the United States. But we're not going to tell you that. We're just going to do it. Sweet. Excuse me. Hello, Mike Panzer. Yeah. Woody Guthrie. Yeah. Interesting stuff. Tragic loss, and sad way to go. But we got his songs. So many wonderful ones, Yeah. This land was made for you and me. Well, that's what the Constitution says. That's what our Declaration of Independence says. That's what this is all about, is to be sovereign. If the United States isn't sovereign, then the blue hats come in, the people from, the caravans come in. We lose our national ability to, as individuals, exercise the rights that our founding documents have given us. These inalienable rights are being alienated from us as I speak today. And we got to turn it around and stop it. We got to stop it. I mean, this is where I plant my flag. It's on the Bill of Rights. You can't have a sovereign country unless you have sovereign individuals inside it. That's got to make sense. And these inalienable rights that people so easily just let them slip away because of national emergency. Got to wake up, people. You got to get out of the fog. Okay, let's get to our content. I've spent 4 or 5 years talking about the Dulles brothers as if they're the worst thing that ever happened to our country, and I still believe that in a way. But isn't it odd that nobody rose up against them? Nobody tried to stop them? Well, it's not true. Now we know that at least one Army general, a very, very highly ranked, respected, real war fighting general named General Arthur Trudeau, did. So I'm going to start by reintroducing you to this book here. And I think you should get a copy of it if you want to keep studying McDuff with me. This is part of the story. And Bus, even if you're not interested in my dad's story in particular, this man was one of the most important spies of the Cold War, and nobody knows anything about him. He was a kind of stuck in a limbo by the CIA to make sure that he only talked to the CIA and that he didn't get his chance to talk to J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI like he wanted to. So, as I've often told you, my dad went to the Bronx. It's very unusual for him to just travel up to somewhere like that in 1965. And right at the time when he was with the Pentagon, and perhaps Mr. Goleniewski was able to contact somebody that sent my dad up there to debrief him. It's certainly possible. It's just a speculation at this point, but this man is fascinating, even if he's not, the real heir to the Romanov fortune. But who knows? We really don't know the answer for sure. But I think Kevin Coogan has done a great job with this book, and I think he's gotten, in his opinion at the end of the book, he makes a lot of sense. I won't tell you what he says, because I think you should get yourself a copy of this book. So I'm going to jump in on page 290, and I realize there's going to be a lot of background that you don't have But I think in order to just keep this into one show, I'm going to start here. And I'll maybe be able to go back and pick up some more of the background as we get toward the end of the show. I just don't know how much time the first part's going to take. But, at any rate, let us put ourselves back into the early Cold War. And specifically, let's remember that here is the Henry Kissinger at Harvard, right? Writing and studying um, the Korean War is going on from what 51 to 53 or something like that. The McCarthy hearings and President Eisenhower elected, who really does work with the Dulles brothers and help them achieve what they're trying to do during the Cold War, a kind of a nod and a wink relationship, and one which I think he regretted by the time he talked about the military-industrial complex at the end of his term. I think he regretted putting so much faith in the Dulles programs. But let's do that another day. Let's get into reading about General Arthur Trudeau. I do think I should owe you an introduction from a biography of him. So let me get his Wikipedia up here and just sweep through it real quick with you. Don't rely on Wikipedia, and this is one of the great examples of that. So we'll see what Wiki says, and then we'll get into the details in Kevin Coogan's account. Arthur Trudeau was a lieutenant general in the United States Army. He's best known for his command of the 7th Infantry Division during the Battle of Pork Chop Hill in the Korean War. Born in Middlebury, Vermont, entered West Point in 1920. So there he is. My dad's born in 1920, so he's like the generation ahead of McDuff, okay? 20 years older than McDuff. He graduated in the class of 1924, and he was high in the class too, and was able to become an engineer in the engineering corps, which is what he had wanted. Then they skip ahead. In 1944, promoted to brigadier general, specialist in amphibious warfare as the prior chief of staff of the Engineer Amphibian Command. Now, this is very important to my story too, my dad's story, because these are the LSTs and the Higgins boats that are developed in connection with Marine General Victor Krulak, who becomes my dad's boss at SACSA in 62. All right, he was a judge at the trial of General Honma, the Japanese general who committed war crimes during the invasion of the Philippines by the Japanese, and was responsible for the Bataan Death March. So obviously a general whose authority was respected and placed in a position not only to be a division commander at Pork Chop Hill, but also a judge on a panel judging war crimes. He was named Chief of Army Intelligence, that's G2, in October 1953, but was relieved of his command 20 months later when Allen Dulles, Director of Central Intelligence, sent a scathing memorandum of complaints to the Pentagon. Although the contents of the memorandum were not made public, Trudeau was noted for his vigorous anti-communist statements, and he often clashed with other government officials over their differing views of communist intentions. He returned to Korea to take command of I Corps. On October 18, 1956, Trudeau was promoted to lieutenant general. In 1958, he returned to Washington as director of Army Research and Development. Upon retirement from the Army, Trudeau went on to head Gulf Labs of the Gulf Oil Corporation in Pittsburgh until 1968. He then served as special advisor to the chairman of Pittsburgh's Rockwell International Aerospace firm until 1972. He was an outspoken advocate of racial integration of the military. He said it was in the nation's best interest that educational opportunities be provided for the disadvantaged so they could take advantage of new career openings. Trudeau is a member of the Military Intelligence Hall of Fame. Trudeau died on May 5th, 1991 in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Interesting how many of these guys die in Maryland, isn't it? So, I also now want to dig a little bit deeper and go into the U.S. Army biography of General Trudeau. All right, so he grew up in Vermont. He was from a military family. He liked to play with toy soldiers and just grew up into that mentality of he wanted to be a soldier. So he has a successful career at West Point as a student, was able to get a commission in the Corps of Engineers, which is a top posting, and include his 15 years of active duty included a graduate school at Berkeley, a senior post with the New Deal Works Progress Administration, a civil works assignment in the Seattle district, and a stint as an instructor at the Corps at the Engineers Regiment in New Jersey of the National Guard. Then an instructor at Fort Leavenworth in 1941, where he becomes the person who develops the doctrine for the new motorized division of the Army. In early 1942, he put together the college's amphibious assault program. So again, if you've read my book about my dad, you understand how intimately the story of General MacArthur and his island hopping campaign is with the development of LSTs and these amphibious landing vehicles. When a new engineering amphibian command came open, Trudeau's experience served him well. He became chief of staff for the command and played an instrumental part in its organization. Now, this was what blew my mind. In 1942, Trudeau also headed a mission to the Pacific, which resulted from an urgent appeal by General MacArthur for engineer amphibian troops. Trudeau selected Cairns, Australia as the site for a plant to assemble prefabricated landing craft that would be shipped to the theater from the United States. Within an amazingly short period of time, the plant was turning out some 300 vehicles per month. The water was MacArthur's highway up the island's chain, and his amphibian engineers gave him the means of transport and supply. So here's Trudeau working directly under MacArthur for a couple of years, as it turns out. In addition, he was deputy director of military training, and in the Philippines as commander of Base X, the port of Manila. So this is the port of Manila, which becomes the ultimate aim of USS Nashville when they are leaving after the Leyte battle and escorting the supply ships and the troops of General Kruger's 6th Army to the next island, Mindanao, for the invasion of Manila. Well, as we know, the Nashville was hit by the kamikaze en route there, but nevertheless, it gives you the context of what's going on at the time. So now, General Trudeau also served as a senior member of the War Crimes Tribunal, uh, and Hama was condemned to death. But the trial left serious questions in Trudeau's mind. To what degree should commanders be held guilty of crimes committed by subordinates operating largely on their own in the confusion of battle over vast areas or scattered islands? Okay. He volunteers for the Korean War and Pork Chop Hill and a number of other battles. So he's a real soldier, okay? He's a real general. He's not like General Reinhard Gehlen, who's not a war fighting general. He's an intelligence guy. So this is a contrast that I think it's worth keeping in mind, that these are real soldiers as opposed to intelligence officers. And doesn't it reflect what General MacArthur ordered, that the OSS was not to come into his Southwest Pacific area? He did not want these spooks messing up with his own intelligence operations. So there we have, let's see, Trudeau returned to Washington in the key post of G2. For the better part of the next 2 years, he worked to gain respect for intelligence in the Army by bringing in officers of general officer potential, emphasized the development of language training and technical intelligence, and was responsible for improvement in combat intelligence training. During these years, he, accompanied by others, he visited all but 2 countries that had an American embassy. His strong views on national security policy resulted in abrupt reassignment to the Far East in September 1955. That's when he gets kicked out of the G2 position by our nemesis, Allen Dulles. All right. Now, General Trudeau, who we just talked about, and an associate of his named Colonel Philip Corso, C-O-R-S-O, are the subjects of this next reading from page 290 of the chapter called Uncle Sam and the Knights, meaning the Knights, the Shinny Knights of Malta, and Uncle Sam. And the subsection is called General Trudeau's War. Here we go. The Army R&D division under Trudeau worked closely with Project Paperclip Nazi rocket scientists at the Army's Redstone Missile Command base in Huntsville, Alabama. As General Trudeau put it, quote, "We had a good portion of the men who had been brought over as scientists from Germany under the old Paperclip program. They had really done the scientific development on much of what we had accomplished." Once Trudeau took over at Army R&D, he presented a new assignment for the paperclip scientists, the military occupation of the moon. Okay. From the mid-1950s on, Trudeau and Corso pursued an even more ambitious project than the military conquest of the moon. They set out to topple the CIA and the Gehlen organization. General Trudeau's War. In September 1955, just a few weeks after his dismissal from G2, General Arthur Trudeau circulated a document on the supposed, quote, Fabian socialist infiltration of the Eisenhower government. Okay, you guys know that Fabian socialists are my least favorite people, right? And the London School of Economics and all the work we've done about that. So this Fabian socialism is a buzzword for General Trudeau, believe it or not. It's a key concept that we've already talked about. So the supposed Fabian socialist infiltration of the Eisenhower government that included accusations against top officials at both CIA and the State Department. Trudeau explained his long-standing resistance to the CIA this way, quote, "Unfortunately, the residual capability of Army covert intelligence with cover in Eastern Europe after the war was resented by the Central Intelligence Agency to an alarming degree." Okay, so background, the Army had set up its Gladio positions in Europe, not under the CIA. That's interesting, isn't it? It's new thinking to me. I didn't think that way. Now I'm thinking, okay, Gladio, or at least the operation that became Gladio, wasn't an OSS CIA operation at the beginning, or maybe entirely, but it's an Army operation because the Army itself is saying, we're going to have to fight the Ruskies, and so we need some stay behind armies. So learning more and more. Toto is really upset when I talk about Operation Gladio, and I don't blame her a bit. Okay, so unfortunately, the Army's residual capability of covert intelligence with cover in Eastern Europe was resented by the CIA. I sensed this on many, many occasions. In fact, it always was a factor in any actions that we took and was a real contributing factor to difficulties that developed in my own relationship, particularly with the covert segment of the CIA. Trudeau also took aim at the CIA's role in creating the National Intelligence Estimate. Okay, this is one of our favorite topics from George Webb, is the National Intelligence Estimate that helped set long-term government policy. Trudeau claimed that the CIA's estimate of the Soviet Union was not based on facts, but rather on CIA ideology that adopted an apologetic approach to Russia. To convey its views to the president unchallenged, the CIA would give the Army and other agencies the finished NIE draft the weekend before the final version for the Oval Office was finalized, making it almost impossible to challenge its claims. All right, we've talked about this National Intelligence Office and the National Intelligence Estimate, but you see what's going on here. And I've actually got a couple of books that were given to me years ago that clarify the fact that the CIA's estimates were highly, highly inflated as to the Russian capability. Let me go see if Toto needs something. She doesn't usually bark so much. I'll be right back. All righty. So there's 2 points there in that little paragraph. Number one, the CIA is exaggerating the capability of the Soviets. Okay, we know that, but here's somebody that knew it, that was a general officer in 1955. He knew it. Trudeau claimed the CIA's estimate was based rather on CIA ideology that adopted an apologetic approach to Russia. What does that mean? An apologetic approach to Russia? Apologetic means The opposite of what John Foster Dulles said, that you're either with us or against us, right? The whole propaganda effort of the State Department and the Dulles brothers and the CIA is that the Ruskies are our enemy and they have these horrible weapons, these nuclear bombs that they're going to throw at us. And so we have to go to mutually assured destruction as our operating manual. And so we have to be nice to them because they could blow us up. So let's be kind of apologetic. Let's work everything out. This is what Trudeau is observing, and it is exactly what Henry Kissinger is putting into play, that we're doing the opposite of what we tell the public. We say we're fighting against communism, but what we're really doing is sharing our data with these guys for an ulterior motive. But why was the CIA so soft on Russia? Why did the agency suffer from a string of disastrous intelligence failures with CIA agent networks constantly rolled up by East Bloc services? There you go, right? We've seen it. And what about the CIA's German crown jewel, the Gehlen Organization? In August 1955, the CIA got Trudeau removed from G2. The next month, the intelligence community was rocked by a report from Trudeau and two of his top aides, Corso and Colonel Earl Leret. The heading of an FBI document gives a summary of their study. Quote, allegations of General Arthur S. Trudeau, Ray, infiltration of Fabian socialists into high policy-making areas of the United States government, unquote. Trudeau submitted the names of 122 top government officials, many from the CIA, whom he labeled Fabian socialists, and whose actions contributed to the distorted NIE estimate. Years later, General Trudeau recalled, quote, a report was prepared in some depth by myself and two associates, which analyzed the lines of communication between having decision-making or high decision recommending powers to the White House right on back to agencies who were feeding them material. We plotted these names and their relationships where they really had an in. We then analyzed the statements made in a large number of national security papers and very frequently would get down to a clause, sentence, or paragraph which changed the meaning or moderated it very materially. It sounds just like what they were doing with the amendments to the WHO pandemic treaty, doesn't it? We pinpointed those changes. We pinpointed not only those recommendations on papers submitted, but also correlated them with resulting national security policy papers and showed the influence and penetration that was made in this regard, which in most cases was weakening our overall policy. But somebody let it get in the wrong hands of a man who's so high that they, and I can't explain that too much, started screaming. It resulted in an assistant secretary of state's departure from here, was a factor in my departure, and also resulted in the movement of the State Department, in the movement out of the State Department of another man. We had the goods. One person handed it to the wrong man who is still in government in a sensitive position, I believe. Okay, so what's going on here is that somebody had leaked what Trudeau had assembled to Alan Dulles. When asked who took the initiative to begin the study, Trudeau replied, one other man and myself, because I was convinced we were being sold down the river by equivocation and quibbling in national security policy. There were other aspects also. That one other man was most likely Colonel Corso. On 8th of September 1955, shortly following his dismissal, Trudeau provided the FBI with a copy of the document so the Bureau could conduct its own investigation. Among the names listed by Trudeau as Fabian socialists were the CIA's Sherman Kent, William P. Bundy, Frank Wisner, a blanked out name listed as, quote, in charge of CIA in Germany, Tracy Barnes, drum roll, my favorite, Richard Bissell, Richard Helms, and of all people, James Angleton. From an October 7th, 1955 FBI memo from R.R. Roach to Belmont. Belmont is the third in charge, I think, in the FBI. Memorandum 10655 indicated that there would be a new eruption in relations between CIA and G2. James Angleton of CIA furnished information on 10655 indicating that G2 had been disseminating derogatory information concerning CIA operations and employees to a Mr. X. Not Donald Sullivan, okay? A different Mr. X. Described as a Democrat, former government official with outstanding reputation. CIA story is that blank went to Mr. X with motive of striking at CIA. Mr. X subsequently came to CIA and related all facts. In other words, Angleton has received the report from Mr. X, and clearly Angleton is behind the going to Dulles and saying we got to get rid of Arthur Trudeau. General Trudeau furnished the director, that's Hoover, with charts and memoranda purporting to substantiate charges that certain individuals in and out of government were influencing the United States to take a soft policy against Soviet Russia and world communism. General Trudeau furnished the names of individuals, some allegedly with Fabian socialist leanings and possibly some with communist leanings, who, he stated, had penetrated certain policy-forming organs of our government, including State Department, CIA, Operations Coordinating Board, Planning Control Board, and Planning Board, as well as academic research units at, drumroll, Harvard, Princeton, and Johns Hopkins universities, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, which do research work for the government. Bureau files reflect that Colonel Lorette and Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, Operations Coordinating Board, associates of General Trudeau, disseminated information regarding Fabian socialist charges outside the executive branch, and that G2 did not handle the matter of Fabian socialists in a secure and prudent manner. As a result, Colonel Lorette was accused by CIA of releasing false and derogatory information about that agency. On September 15th, former Congressman Charles J. Kirsten, attached to the staff of Nelson Rockefeller at the White House, called on Director Hoover. Kirsten said that went to see the director that he wanted to discuss matters pertaining to the infiltration into the executive department of individuals with the Fabian socialist philosophy. The FBI re-examined its files and concluded FBI files do not contain any specific, concrete, and conclusive proof that the subjects are Fabian socialists as charged by General Trudeau. Well, Fabian socialism is not something that you are going to prove by writing, letters that say, "Hey, I am a Fabian socialist." It's something that you have to you have to observe and deduce from people's behavior. Now, in 1955, Blank identified the following individuals before the subcommittee as Fabian socialists: W.W. Rostow, McGeorge Bundy, Arthur Schlesinger, Wisner, and as we know, Otto Otepka. Remember, Otto Otepka was the CIA officer that was exposed for espionage in the Scarbeck case that my dad was involved in the investigation, where George and I have done a lot of work fleshing that out. So this is the guy, this is Otepka. Tried to block W.W. Rostow as a security risk from joining the Kennedy administration. Was Tepka also using General Trudeau's list of Fabians as well to block other Kennedy nominees? The FBI memo suggests that the source was Colonel Lorette, as he is later identified as opposing Trudeau and Corso's attempt to raise the Fabian socialist red flag again. So it may have been Colonel Lorette that was the mole that turned in the plans of General Trudeau. Lorette stated that he warned Trudeau against becoming involved in this old issue again and reminded Trudeau how the Fabian socialist issue was partly the cause of his problems in 1955 with the Dulles family, which caused his transfer from Army intelligence. According to Lorette, Trudeau had a fetish about security and intelligence work and cannot keep his fingers out of the area, even though his present responsibility is that of research and development. In other words, he got transferred out of that area, but he's still in it. Thanks to Trudeau's congressional connections, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, quote, will hold an open hearing with blank as a witness in order to smear the Kennedy administration. Corso told Art Bell that he testified before Congress at that time, including at a hearing that he claimed remained classified. So maybe there's some hearing records that we could still find. Trudeau's despised CIA officials included one who went off his rocker and died. Trudeau meant Frank Wisner. As he said, the man who was most responsible for opposing Trudeau was the individual in charge of covert intelligence operations for the CIA. That was Wisner. In his book about Roswell, Corso claimed that during his 4 years working at the White House, the CIA even put a tail on him. When he returned from Germany to work for Trudeau in 1961, quote, they put a tail back on me and I led him down every back alley and rough neighborhood in D.C. He wouldn't shake. So the next day I led my faceless pursuer right to Langley, Virginia, past a sputtering secretary and straight into the office of my old adversary, the director of covert operations, Frank Wisner, one of the best friends the KGB ever had. I told Wisner to his face that yesterday was the last day I would walk around Washington without a handgun. And I put my .45 automatic on his desk. I said, if I saw his tail on me tomorrow, they'd find him in the Potomac the next day with 2 bloody holes for eyes. That is, if they bothered to look for him. Wisner said, you won't do that, Colonel. But I reminded him very politely that I knew where all the bodies were buried, the people he'd gotten killed through his own ineptitude, and worse, his cooperation with the Russians. I'd tell his story to everyone I knew in Congress. Wisner backed down. Subsequently, on a trip to London, Wisner committed suicide and was found hanging in his hotel room. Corso and Wisner knew each other when Corso was on the NSC staff. Yet besides misspelling Wisner's name, the claim that Corso was followed every day for years by the CIA, and the idea that Corso could bully his way into Wisner's CIA office, the fact was that Wisner no longer headed the Directorate of Plans. He suffered a nervous breakdown in September 1958 and spent time in a mental hospital while Richard Bissell took over his job. Okay, 1958. Richard Bissell, Director of Plans, acting. That puts him in the position to do whatever he wants to do to McDuff. After his recovery in 1959, Wisner became CIA London chief. He didn't kill himself on a trip to London. Wisner committed suicide on his farm in Maryland in October 1965, a few years after he retired from the agency. Corso's near obsessive hatred of the CIA pours out in the pages of his book, Roswell, or I think it's called The Day After Roswell is the name of a book that Philip J. Corso wrote in the late 60s, long after these events. Quote, our own military intelligence personnel told us the Soviets were trafficking so heavily in our military secrets that they knew things about us in the Kremlin before we knew them in Congress. The Army at least knew the KGB had penetrated the CIA. The Army knows that the KGB has penetrated the CIA. Okay? That puts the Army in a direct war footing against the CIA. But here's what kept the roof from falling in on all of us. Now listen to this. This is Corso, who hates the CIA, so take it with a grain of salt. But listen, the KGB and CIA weren't really the adversaries everybody thought them to be. They spied on each other, but for all practical purposes, and also because each agency had been thoroughly penetrated by the other, they behaved just like the same organization. But when it came down to loyalty, the CIA was loyal to the KGB and vice versa. CIA penetration by the KGB and what amounted to their joint spying on the military was a fact we accepted during the 1950s and 1960s. The idea of being tailed by the CIA resonates with a personal memory, which I'll share with you. I was in high school in the late 60s. I graduated in 1970. I got a learner's driver's license when I was in the junior year, so that would be 67, 68. And because I lived, like 23 miles away from my high school, it was very convenient for me to be able to drive to school in my last year. So this must have been 69. Well, one day I was driving home and I noticed my father in our other car on a road that was intersecting with the road I was on. And so we're both headed to the house. We're headed down Fort Washington Road. But when he turned onto Fort Washington Road, I was able to time it so that I got on the road right behind him. And I guess I tapped my horn or waved at him or something to let him know it was me. And so we proceeded home, and after we stopped the car and I got out and I was walking toward the house, and he said, don't ever do that. He was really angry at me. He said, don't ever do that again. What if both cars were hurt in the same accident? And he was really angry at me. And some years later, I think it was my mother or maybe someone else suggested to me that that was probably because they were chasing him. Because we know that he was involved in some up and down Indian Head Highway car chases. I thought, oh, okay, so this is maybe the answer is what was going on. It was that these CIA people were following my dad because he was more with the Pentagon, the military people, and the FBI. Just a speculation, but I thought I'd share it. So, as part of an attempted takedown of the CIA, Trudeau tried to discredit the Galen organization. Corso told Art Bell. Art Bell was a famous radio announcer back in the 60s, that during Trudeau's clash with the CIA, Army CIC, that is the Counterintelligence Corps during World War II, in Europe, gathered intelligence that proved that the Galen organization had been penetrated by the Russians. As G2 head, General Trudeau established contact with the first West German ambassador to Washington, Dr. Heinz Krekeler, after the embassy opened in May 1955. Trudeau said that one day in June he visited the embassy to discuss the need for a German military attaché to liaison regularly with the Pentagon. Kreckler then invited him to meet with a high German official who was visiting the embassy that afternoon. Trudeau claimed that to his complete surprise, Konrad Adenauer was there, and Kreckler introduced him to the German Chancellor, Konrad Adenauer, and he's somebody we've talked about recently as well. Check his picture on the Wikipedia. A short time later, quote, Mr. Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA, had sent a letter to the Secretary of Defense saying that he had lost all confidence in me because of this contact I had made with Adenauer. Dulles hit the roof for a reason. When Trudeau spoke with Adenauer, he warned him against relying on CIA-financed Galenorg. From Trudeau's oral history, quote, there really could have been some big noises made over this because the CIA was in not too good repute anyway, and they were losing an awful lot of agents in their German setup who were being exposed, perhaps because they built too fast. At least they were penetrated. We were worried about an outfit that already was penetrated having charge of German security in Bonn, as the area where our war plans and everything would be exposed. Of course, since those plans were leaked to the Russians to the east. The things that I surmised would happen have happened. They have all happened. There have been many serious defections. I have no apologies for what I tried to do for American security. I have no apologies to make at all. What has happened in the way of penetrations of the West German government and the loss of highly classified war plans and intelligence is, to me, still an indication that I was absolutely right in what I tried to prevent in 1955. Read the books about Galen's organization. I'm not apologizing to anyone, nor do I regret that I expended as much effort as I did, even though it put a real crimp in my Army career. Trudeau's clash with Dulles even reached the New York Daily News. In a 1st of September 1955 article, Daily News writer John O'Donnell reported that Trudeau had been forced out of G2 by Allen Dulles personally. O'Donnell said that Dulles first sent a letter to the Secretary of Defense. The feud then reached President Eisenhower, who sided with Dulles. In his initial letter, Dulles, quote, charged that the Army's top intelligence officer, quote, without consulting the Central Intelligence Agency, had talked with West Germany's Chancellor Adenauer here last June, quote, in an effort to undermine the confidence of Adenauer in a hush-hush CIA bankrolled setup in Germany headed by Galen. Furthermore, said Dulles, the general had expressed doubt as to the reliability of Galen as an individual and the security safeguards of the mystery organization. Just a few years later, Goleniewski would bring down Heinz Felfa and largely prove General Trudeau's fears justified. Well, that's another section of the book about what Goleniewski did in connection with Heinz Felfa, and that, of course, leads into the Cambridge spy ring and all of the incredible revelations that Goleniewski did make and did not get credit for. But at this point, with the assistance of Kevin Coogan, we're able to see that there really was an opposition to the Dulles plan, that there were military officers that saw the danger of relying on a Reinhold Galen and the apparent and obvious exchange of technical information, war plans, and just espionage that was going on willy-nilly right under the nose of the CIA. Well, we'll talk about this some more. We'll see how it all fits into my dad's career and how we need to really study the careers of people who are real soldiers, real war fighters and real opponents of the CIA. Have a good afternoon. Thank you so much.